We are living through the greatest, most tragic theft in human history. Look at your daily life. Look at how you operate from the moment you open your eyes in the morning to the second you drop your head onto the pillow at night. Your mind is no longer your own. It has been systematically hijacked, fragmented, and sold to the highest bidder. You cannot read a single chapter of a book without checking your phone. You cannot sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes without feeling an overwhelming, anxious itch to consume cheap, mindless entertainment. Your brain has become completely addicted to the constant toxic drip of instant dopamine. This theft did not happen by accident, and it did not happen quietly. It happened deliberately, funded by some of the largest companies that have ever existed, employing teams of engineers and behavioral researchers whose entire job description is to make the act of looking away from your work feel slightly more rewarding than staying with it. Nobody sat down and decided to lose their ability to focus. It was taken from them, one perfectly engineered notification at a time, by people who understood the architecture of human attention far better than the humans whose attention they were harvesting. Modern society tells you that you are stressed because you have too much to do. That is a lie. You are stressed because your mind is a chaotic prison of endless noise. You are exhausted because you have completely lost the ability to control your own attention. We have built an entire civilization of people who can conquer companies, accumulate wealth, and manipulate technology, yet remain completely helpless the moment they are forced to face the silence of their own minds. You think you are the master of your destiny. You are a hostage to the next notification, a slave to the next distraction. 1,500 years ago, a mysterious blue-eyed monk walked out of India, crossed the treacherous Himalayan mountains, and entered ancient China. His name was Bodhidharma. He was the legendary founder of Zen, the man who would later teach the monks of the Shaolin Temple how to forge their bodies into iron weapons. The China he walked into was not waiting for him with open arms. By most accounts, his first audience was with an emperor who had spent a fortune building temples, funding monasteries, and commissioning sacred texts, fully expecting to be praised for his extraordinary religious merit. The emperor asked him directly what reward all of this devotion had earned. Bodhidharma told him bluntly that none of it amounted to anything, no merit at all. The emperor, stunned, asked him a second question, then who exactly was standing before him speaking with such confidence? Bodhidharma's answer, according to the legend, was simply, "I don't know." Not evasive humility. A direct refusal to hand the emperor a label he could file away and stop thinking about. The emperor, by legend, was so unsettled by this answer that Bodhidharma was forced to leave the court entirely, supposedly crossing a river on nothing more than a single reed to escape pursuit. Whether or not every detail of that crossing is literal, the message underneath it is not subtle. He had just told the most powerful men in the country that every visible, measurable, impressive thing he had built meant nothing next to the state of his own undisciplined mind. This was a man who did not soften his words for anyone, regardless of the title they carried. Bodhidharma did not arrive with soft words, comforting scriptures, or intellectual theories. He looked at the spiritual and intellectual leaders of his time and viewed their endless talking, their constant debating, their need for external validation as a profound sickness. He understood that true, undeniable power is not found in what you know. It is found in your ability to master the internal void. To prove this reality, Bodhidharma did something so radical, so terrifyingly intense, that it altered the course of history forever. He walked up a steep mountain behind the Shaolin Temple, found a cold, damp stone cave, and sat down. He crossed his legs, cleared his mind, and faced a blank, solid rock wall. And then he stayed there. He did not leave the cave to preach. He did not seek the company of followers. He did not look for comfort, entertainment, or escape. Bodhidharma stared directly at that blank stone wall for 9 consecutive years. Think about the psychological weight of that action. 9 years of absolute, unbroken silence. 9 years of staring at nothing but cold, unyielding stone. The legend of his intense focus contains a chilling, brutal detail that modern society is terrified to contemplate. It is written that during his years in the cave, Bodhidharma fought a constant, exhausting battle against his own physical limitations. One night, after years of absolute discipline, his body collapsed from exhaustion and his eyelids closed. He fell asleep for a brief moment. When he woke, Bodhidharma was consumed by a cold, ruthless rage at his own lack of control. He refused to let his biology dictate his focus. He took a sharp blade, and without a single moment of hesitation, he cut off his own eyelids and threw them to the ground, ensuring his eyes would remain permanently, brutally open, forced to stare down the void without ever closing again. To the modern, fragile mind, this sounds like absolute madness, a horrific, unnecessary act of self-mutilation. But Bodhidharma understood a truth your modern distractions are desperately trying to hide from you. It is worth pausing here to say plainly what this legend is and is not. No serious historian treats the eyelid story as literal biography. It survives the way most founder myths survive, passed down centuries later by students trying to capture, in one unforgettable image, how absolute this man's discipline must have felt to the people around him. You are not meant to walk away from this video looking for a blade. You are meant to walk away unable to forget the image of a mind so disgusted by its own weakness that legend itself reached for the most extreme metaphor available. The lesson was never about the eyelids. It was about what kind of relationship with your own distraction would have to exist for a story like that to even get told. What Bodhidharma actually left behind, beyond the legend, was a teaching that Zen tradition still summarizes in 4 short lines, a direct transmission outside of all scripture, no reliance on words or letters, pointing directly at the mind, seeing your own nature and becoming awakened. Every major school of Zen and Chan Buddhism that followed for the next 15 centuries, and, by extension, much of what the modern wellness industry now repackages as mindfulness, with the lineage carefully scrubbed off, traces its root back to a man who refused to explain himself in comfortable language and instead pointed silently at a wall. The version of Be Present sold to you in an app today, with a soft voice and a subscription fee, is the great-great-grandchild of a teaching whose founder cut off his own eyelids rather than let his focus blink. Now look at yourself. You cannot even close a tab on your browser without feeling a sense of loss. You cannot put your phone in another room for 2 hours without experiencing a wave of phantom anxiety. You have allowed the world to make you soft, reactive, weak. What Bodhidharma was actually doing in that cave was not a passive religious ritual. He was waging the most violent war a human being can ever fight, the war against his own restless, chaotic ego. The wall was not just stone. The wall was a metaphor for the absolute boredom, the isolation, the agonizing lack of stimulation that every master must endure before achieving greatness. This is the hidden bottleneck of success that nobody wants to talk about. True mastery is deeply, profoundly boring. When you build a business, when you learn a complex skill, when you code an architecture, when you study a deep science, you are sitting in a cave staring at a blank wall. The modern loser looks at the wall for 5 minutes, gets bored, and immediately runs to check social media, to text a friend, to consume cheap entertainment. He flees the silence because the silence forces him to realize how empty and undisciplined he truly is. He is terrified of the void, but the master stays in the cave. The master stares at the wall until the wall cracks. Boredom, in this light, stops being a problem to be solved and becomes something closer to a muscle. Most people have never deliberately trained it because for their entire lives, there has always been an immediate way to avoid it. Like any untrained muscle, it feels disproportionately painful the first few times you actually use it, which is exactly why almost everyone quits in the first few minutes and concludes the muscle simply doesn't exist in them. It exists. It is simply atrophied, sometimes so completely that an adult today may have gone years without experiencing more than 90 consecutive seconds of true, undiluted boredom. Bodhidharma trained that muscle for 9 years until it could carry the weight of an entire martial arts lineage. You do not need 9 years. You need enough repeated exposure that the muscle remembers it is allowed to exist at all. This is not only a productivity lesson confined to laptops and deadlines. The same collapse shows up everywhere stillness is required and avoided. Watch how people train physically, chasing the next exercise trend, the next supplement, the next workout app, anything except the unglamorous, repetitive boredom of doing the same compound lift correctly for months, because the boredom of mastery is less exciting than the dopamine of novelty. Watch how people approach relationships, abandoning a connection the instant it stops producing the intense, addictive highs of the early stage, mistaking the absence of constant stimulation for the absence of depth, when depth has never once arrived without first passing through a long, quiet, uneventful middle that most people flee before it has the chance to mean anything. The wall is not just on your desk. It is in your gym, in your relationships, in every domain of your life where you have quietly decided that boredom means something has gone wrong, rather than understanding that boredom is usually the exact threshold mastery hides behind. There is a reason this particular form of suffering feels so unbearable to the modern mind, and it has a name now that it did not have in Bodhidharma's century. Researchers studying attention have identified something they call the default mode network, a system in the brain that activates the instant you stop directing your focus at a task, flooding your mind with wandering thoughts, replayed conversations, anxieties about the future, anything except stillness. For most of human history, this network had nowhere urgent to send you, so it simply produced boredom, and boredom eventually produced thought, and thought eventually produced insight. Today, for the first time in the species' existence, every single flicker of that network has an instantly available escape hatch sitting in your pocket, engineered by some of the most highly paid behavioral scientists on Earth to capture exactly that flicker the moment it appears. You are not weak for struggling to sit with a blank wall. You are being out-resourced by a trillion-dollar industry whose entire business model depends on you never learning what Bodhidharma learned in that cave. Every notification is a tiny, perfectly engineered eyelid, gently trying to close over your attention, and the masters of this era are not the ones who never feel the pull. They are the ones who have trained themselves to notice the pull and stay anyway. There is a second piece of research that explains exactly why the first founder in the example you are about to hear feels so tired despite producing so little. Organizational psychologists studying workplace focus identified something they call attention residue, the discovery that when you switch away from a task before finishing it, a measurable portion of your cognitive capacity stays stuck on the abandoned task even after you have moved on to something else. You do not actually return to your work with a clean mind after checking your phone for 30 seconds. You return with a mind partially still occupied by whatever you just glanced at, dragging an invisible weight behind every subsequent minute of work. 40 interruptions a day do not cost you 40 30-second breaks. They cost you 40 separate taxes on every minute that follows each one, compounding across the day into an exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you actually accomplished, and everything to do with how many times your focus was forced to half leave and half return. Bodhidharma's wall never asked anything of him twice. Your phone asks you to half leave the task in front of you dozens of times before lunch, and then wonders why, by evening, there is nothing left in the tank. Out of Bodhidharma's 9 years of brutal, unyielding silence, something remarkable happened. The monks of the Shaolin Temple, physically weak and spiritually decayed at the time, looked at his terrifying focus and begged him to teach them. From that cave of absolute stillness, Bodhidharma birthed the most dangerous, lethal, legendary martial arts lineage the world has ever seen. He proved an eternal law of power. Ultimate physical dominance is born out of ultimate mental stillness. Your external strength is entirely dictated by your internal capacity to tolerate isolation. It is worth noting how strange that sequence actually is, if you think about it for more than a second. The most devastatingly effective fighting system in Chinese history was not invented by a warrior obsessed with combat. It was invented by a man who spent nearly a decade doing nothing but sit motionlessly in a cave. The kicks, the strikes, the legendary discipline of Shaolin Kung Fu, all of it grew out of stillness so total, it became its own kind of weapon. The monks who came to him expecting techniques were instead handed a mirror. Before you can move with lethal precision, you first have to be able to sit, completely undistracted, with absolutely nothing happening at all. Almost nobody training today wants to hear that the foundation of the skill they're chasing is the exact thing they are least willing to practice. Picture two people trying to build something that actually requires deep, sustained focus, a business, a craft, a body of serious work. The first person sits down to work with good intentions every single day. He opens his laptop, and within 4 minutes, without even deciding to, his thumb has already opened a new tab. He tells himself it's just a quick check, a message, a notification, a 5-second scroll to reset before getting back to the real task. The 5 seconds becomes 20 minutes. He returns to the work mildly guilty, slightly more scattered than before, and has to spend the first 10 minutes simply rebuilding the thread of thought he was holding before the interruption. He repeats this pattern, by conservative estimate, dozens of times across a single working day. At the end of the day, he is exhausted, and yet, if he is honest with himself, he cannot point to more than 90 real minutes of focused output. He blames his tiredness on how much he had to do. The truth is, he did almost nothing, at enormous mental cost, because his attention was sliced into hundreds of disconnected fragments, none of them ever deep enough to produce anything of substance. By week 3, the pattern has become so familiar that he no longer even notices the reach for the phone happening. It has slipped below conscious awareness, automatic, a reflex rather than a decision. By month 2, he has started telling people he simply isn't a deep focused person, converting a trained habit into a fixed identity, which guarantees the habit will never be questioned again. The second person treats her work session the way Bodhidharma treated the cave. Phone in another room, not just on silent. Browser tabs closed, not just minimized. The first 20 minutes are genuinely uncomfortable. An itch behind the eyes, a phantom urge to check something, anything, just to relieve the pressure of undivided attention. She does not obey the itch. She sits with the discomfort the same way the cave sat with the boredom of the wall, and somewhere past the 20-minute mark, something shifts. The itch fades. The mind, finding no escape hatch available, finally settles into the actual problem in front of her, and the next 2 hours produce more usable work than the first person's entire fragmented day. In week 3, the discomfort of the first 20 minutes has already started shrinking. Not because the urge disappeared, but because her mind has begun to trust that the session will hold regardless of the urge, so the urge stops escalating into panic. By month 2, deep, undistracted focus has quietly become the default state she returns to, rather than a discipline she has to fight her way back into every single day. She is not more talented than the first person. She has simply built a version of the cave that her phone is not allowed to enter, and she has done it on purpose, repeatedly, until staying became less effortful than leaving. If you want to win in the brutal economic landscape of today, you must build your own cave. You must practice the ruthless art of staring down your own wall. Tomorrow morning, you must become your own tyrant. Look at the difficult, exhausting, unglamorous tasks ahead of you and treat them exactly like Bodhidharma's stone wall. Turn off the notifications, disconnect the internet, eliminate the chatter, cut away your avenues of escape with the same cold, remorseless precision the legend used to describe a man who refused to let his own biology decide where his focus would go. Force your mind to stay locked onto the target until the job is done. You do not need a literal cave or 9 literal years to begin. You need one block of time, today, where the phone leaves the room rather than simply going silent, where the browser closes rather than simply minimizes, and where you decide in advance that the first 20 minutes of discomfort are the toll you pay to get anywhere near the version of focus this entire video has been describing. Most people quit in minute 4, precisely when the itch is loudest, and conclude that deep focus simply isn't available to them. The itch is not evidence that you can't do this. It is evidence that you are finally doing it, and your mind, deprived of its usual escape hatch for the first time in longer than you'd like to admit, is doing exactly what every untrained mind does the moment the wall finally appears in front of it. This is, in its own way, the 6th piece of the same weapon this channel keeps assembling from a different civilization every time. Musashi removed feeling from effort. Lao Tzu removed force from outcome. Tsunetomo removed hope from fear. Sun Tzu removed information from exposure. Krishna removed avoidance from duty. Bodhidharma removes escape from attention. Strip away the costumes, the swords, the rivers, the battlefields, the cave, and you are looking at the same discovery, found independently across 6 different centuries and civilizations that had no contact with one another. The untrained mind is always reaching for something to relieve it, a feeling, a current, a hope, an audience, a comfortable avoidance, a notification, and mastery in every single one of these traditions simply means you have stopped reaching. Stop waiting for the work to become fun. Stop waiting for the process to become exciting. The process will not change for you. You must change for the process. You must become comfortable with the agonizing silence of deep focus. Understand that the discomfort you feel in the first few minutes of real, undistracted work is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is simply the default mode network rattling the door of your attention. The way it has rattled every human mind in history, the instant stimulation disappears. The difference between you and the wall Bodhidharma stared down for 9 years is not that he never felt the pull. It is that he had already decided, long before he sat down, that the pull would not be the one making the decisions. You get to make that same decision tomorrow morning, on a much smaller scale, the very first time your thumb twitches toward your phone before the first 10 minutes of work are even finished. The modern world wants you distracted, fragmented, easily controlled. It wants you to keep looking away from your true potential. The choice is yours. You can keep chasing the cheap, fleeting illusions of the crowd, or you can step into the cave, face the wall, and become completely unstoppable. Open your eyes. The countdown has ended. Get to work.